Sleep can be a profound form of absence. That's why Santa and the Tooth Fairy and the Sandman all come at night. They know that your body is in the bed, but that you yourself have slipped out for a moment so they can do their thing. Some years ago, I received a call from the Essendon police station. A homeless man had wandered into the station and handed my wallet across the counter. I thanked the officer but told him that this was impossible, as my wallet was in my bedside drawer where I'd put it the night before. At the time, I was living in a terrace house belonging to a religious community. My bedroom was upstairs and at the back. Access was provided by a flight and a half of creaky stairs. The door was tight in the jamb, and often it needed a shoulder to persuade it to let anyone in. The room was so small that everyone assumed it had once been a servant's quarters and that servants had been a chaste breed. A single narrow bed all but filled the space, leaving room for a wardrobe at the foot of the bed and a small table on the other side of the bed from the door. To get to the table, you had to shuffle sideways like a crab around the bed and past the wardrobe. I'm sorry, officer, but that could never have happened. I didn't go into the salubrious details of religious accommodation. It must belong to somebody else, I concluded. Just to be sure, I went upstairs to check. My keys were in the drawer where I'd put them, so were my sunglasses. This was the place where I emptied my pockets every night. If I ever wore cufflinks, I suppose they would have been there, and a mobile phone, if they'd been invented yet. But the wallet was gone. I rang the officer back. The man says he got the wallet during the night from an upstairs room at the back of a terrace house. I think I need to come and see it, I said. And sure enough, this guy I was such a heavy sleeper and noisy sleeper that he'd used my snoring from the street to find his way into the house, upstairs, to the back, around, and of course I was completely dead to the world, and he got my wallet and walked out with it, and then the stranger still handed it in at the Essendon police station the next day. Anyway, just one more little bit, because this is just a bit from the broader world of the book, because I've read a few of the personal bits, but there's lots of stuff that one of the great things about writing about sleep is that the book can go anywhere, because sleep is about everything. And it's such a commonplace thing, and so universally done, which is only a statement of the obvious, that when you write about a book, there's not much that you have to leave out. But I'd like to read a little bit about Charles Dickens, if I can find it. I know it's in here somewhere. Here we are. Yep. And this is in the section about insomnia and about, if you haven't been to sleep for 21 hours, your cognitive capacity is the same as if you have a blood alcohol reading of 0.08. So if you have not slept for 21 hours, you should not be driving a car, let alone running a country. And you have people on the front page of the paper saying, praising Kevin Rudd lately because he only needs to sleep 3 hours. Maggie Thatcher the same. It's just nuts. It's absolutely nuts that they think somehow their ability to lead is improved by this. It's an extraordinary form of self-delusion. Charles Dickens was a genuine insomniac. His anxiety concerning bedtime reflected in a curious obsession. He would only sleep in a bed with the head pointing north and the feet pointing south. Some people have come up with many such rituals, some easier to explain than others. Elizabeth I, for example, always slept with a sword in her bed, perhaps to defend her virginity or to ward off the Armada if it got that far, but at least you can see the point of a sword, so to speak. The purpose of Dickens' obsession may have been the obsession itself. He was equally fussy about dress and food, although beds had a special hold on him. He always had trouble getting a bed to do what it was supposed to do. At least the direction it pointed was one aspect of its behaviour he could control. Dickens' problems with sleep are evident in his capacity on occasion to blur the line between dreams and reality. Ideas for plots sometimes came to him in dreams, and he called the month's instalment for whatever serialised novel he was working on at the time my month's dream. Like Shakespeare, Dickens wrote a lot about sleep. The reason was that, like Shakespeare, he wrote a lot about everything. They both had a voracious imagination. The whole world was not enough to feed it, so they needed to create extra worlds. They made these new worlds by observing the one they already had. They both described sleep apnea, for example, long before the condition had medical credentials. Shakespeare saw it in Falstaff. You might remember, the heaving hill of flesh and all that. Dickens saw it in Joe, a character in the book that made his name, The Pickwick Papers. Joe was introduced as a fat and red-faced boy in a state of somnolency, who divided his time into small allotments of sleeping and eating. Joe is obese. The only thing that rouses him is having his leg pinched and his appearance greeted by the refrain, "Damn that boy, he's fallen asleep again." Indeed, in the early days, sleep apnea was known as Pickwickian syndrome. Yet an even better description, one which seems to understand the underlying seriousness of the condition, is found in the character of John Willett, proprietor of the Maypole Inn in Barnaby Rudge. Willett's breathing when asleep is likened to the problem of a carpenter trying to get through a knot in a piece of timber. On one occasion, Willett, quote, came to another knot, one of surpassing obduracy, which bade fair to throw him into convulsions, and which he got over at last without waking by an effort quite superhuman. Mr. Pickwick experiences insomnia whilst in Bleak House. Volumnia Deadlock is among those legions of people who claim not to sleep when in fact they do. There are descriptions of sleep spasms in the character of Twemlow in Our Mutual Friend, and of sleep paralysis in Oliver Twist. Quote, there is a kind of sleep which steals upon us sometimes, which, while it holds the body prisoner, does not free the mind from a sense of things around it. A minor character in Hard Times takes to their bed for 14 years, something of a Victorian pastime. Dickens observed sleep in all its guises, but battled with it himself. In many respects, his spirit could find rest only in his fiction, a world of his own wonderful making. Reality, on the other hand, was for him a place of profound restlessness, and it was like this from childhood. He said, "My own comfort is in motion," with a capital M. He was always on the move, an escape artist, a mirror to the world, a gifted mimic, and a generous-hearted man, but one with little capacity for self-reflection. He painted hundreds of vivid characters, his prose using primary colours to subtle effect, but he never portrayed himself, at least not with conviction. The narrative voice in some of his personal writing is among his least sure characterisation. Perhaps he knew that if he ever stopped, reality would catch up with him, not least the traumas of his own childhood and its emotional privations. Something was disturbed in his early years which never settled. His eyes widened in self-defence, and all his life he was a magnificent observer. He never missed a thing. His imagination was both his blanket and his bed. His books celebrated human entanglement. In private, Dickens was controlling. Dickens knew one city, London, like few others have known any city. The source for this intimacy was that Dickens knew London at night, in the hours after it took off its makeup. Great Expectations, to take a single example, turns on the moment when the convict Maywick re-enters the life of Pip. That scene rests on its depiction of a wild London night. London was Dickens' bed partner as well as his quarry. He loved her and needed her chaos to pillow his own. The pair of them spent many restless nights together, tossing and turning. He called London his magic lantern. And Dickens' remedy for insomnia was to get up out of bed and to walk. And he used to walk around London, and he wrote powerfully those experiences. And so this bit concludes. The anxiety caused by insomnia can have worse effects than the insomnia itself. After centuries of experimenting with drugs, tonics, aromatherapy and hot bedtime drinks, some of the best advice to those who can't sleep is often to stop trying, and certainly to stop looking at the clock. Insomnia loves attention. Deprived of this, it occasionally sulks and goes away. I once knew a nurse who said that patients in hospital were regularly plagued by poor sleep. It is curious, given the importance of sleep to both physical and psychological healing, that hospitals are among the hardest places in the world to get any. My friend used to walk the wards in the small hours, noticing the number of eyes looking for something to look at. She'd switch on the televisions that hung over the beds, turning down the volume. 20 minutes or half an hour later, she would go around the ward again. The patients would now have nodded off, and she'd turn off the screens. There are times when the best form of attack is surrender. So, that's a little taste of the book. But what this book is, well, what I suppose I was got to in the end with this book, and had a wonderful ride with it and lots of fun. But I suppose I got to and wrote out of a sense that we live in a culture which is exhausted. And the evidence of the exhaustion in our culture is its excess, its need to keep itself stimulated. I write in this book about the prevalence of caffeine in the world, one wake-me-up drug. Coffee, after oil, is the second most valuable commodity in the world economy. More than iron ore, more than anything. Coffee is number 2. And all the other stimulants of different kinds, not just things you take into your body, but the movies, the books, the music, all this stuff to keep us in a state of hype. Like we are children, who just can't settle to sleep. And where do we see the evidence of an exhausted culture? Sleep achieves many things, but there's 2 things that has a special role in achieving. One is the creation of language, and the other is the consolidation. There's been a lot of work done on fetal sleep and baby sleep and its role with the development of language skills. Almost all fetal sleep is REM sleep. And I see it as a teacher, but I see it in the community at large, that year by year, decade by decade, the typical vocabulary of people is diminishing. There was stuff in the paper recently that the English language has just listed its 1 millionth word. And yet the typical working vocabulary of most people is about 1,500 words that they actually use, and it's shrinking. Why? Too tired to think. Too tired to do anything other than repeat what people have already said. And we live in a culture which is replacing memory with retention. There's a difference between memory and retention. If you go to an ATM tonight, take out $20, that little fact will be retained for all eternity on some computer record somewhere. But if you take the $20 and go and buy a bunch of flowers for your beloved and give them the flowers, that moment can never be retained, only remembered, because memory requires the presence of a human being who wants to actually inhabit and own and live with whatever that thing is. That's what memory is. People have talked about the art of memory. There's a wonderful book written in the 1930s, Francis Yates, The Art of Memory. Beautiful. And as we see memory replaced by retention, as we see language replaced increasingly by cliche, this is sure evidence of an exhausted culture, a profoundly exhausted culture, the need for constant hyperstimulation. So I might be writing about the lost art of sleep, but actually I'm trying to address a question which is important to me, which is what can we do to save the world? And really, without being facetious, it comes down to staying in bed. All the problems in the world were caused by people getting out of bed, let's face it. A bit longer in bed, well, it's It's easier said than done.
Please join me in thanking Michael for speaking to us tonight.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming along.